Captain Maria Santos stared at the broken navigation screen and sighed. The small cargo ship Persistence floated in the darkness of space, its crew of 12 humans trying to figure out where they were. The screen showed nothing but static and error messages. "Rodriguez, can you fix this thing?" Maria called to her chief engineer. Carlos Rodriguez crawled out from under a control panel, grease on his hands and a confused look on his face. "The navigation computer is completely fried, Captain. Something hit us with a massive electromagnetic pulse, but I don't see any solar storms or anything that could cause it." Maria looked out the front window at what appeared to be an asteroid field. Large, dark objects floated in the distance, but something about them seemed strange. They were too perfectly arranged, too geometric to be natural rocks. "Those don't look like asteroids to me," said Dr. Sarah Chen, the ship's scientist. She pressed her face against the window, studying the objects with curious eyes. "The formations are too organized, almost like they were placed there on purpose." James Park, the ship's mechanic, joined them at the window. "Maybe it's some kind of space junk, old satellites or something?" Lisa Wang, their communications officer, suddenly looked up from her station. "Captain, I'm picking up some kind of signal. It's very faint, but it's definitely artificial, not natural background radiation." Maria felt a small chill run down her spine. In 3 years of cargo runs through this sector of space, they had never encountered any signs of alien life. Humans had been exploring space for over 200 years, and while they had found many planets that could support life, they had never met another intelligent species. "What kind of signal?" Maria asked. "It's hard to tell. Very complex. Lots of different frequencies, almost like a scanning beam." Suddenly, the space around them began to change. The dark objects that had looked like asteroids started to move. Lights appeared on their surfaces, revealing them to be massive ships. Not just ships, warships. The vessels were enormous, easily 10 times the size of the Persistence. Their hulls were black and covered in what looked like weapons. "Oh my," Dr. Chen said softly. "Those are definitely not asteroids." The alien ships surrounded the small human freighter completely. There was no escape route. Maria counted at least 20 vessels, each one capable of destroying her little cargo ship with a single shot. "Captain," Lisa said, her voice slightly higher than usual. "They're targeting us with some kind of energy beam. Multiple beams, actually." Maria looked around at her crew. They all seemed nervous but curious rather than terrified. This was, after all, the first contact with alien life in human history. Despite the threatening appearance of the ships, there was an excitement in the air. "Are they trying to communicate?" Maria asked. "I think so. The signals are getting stronger. Wait, I think I can isolate the communication frequencies." The main screen flickered to life, showing the interior of one of the alien ships. The being that appeared on screen was tall and thin, with gray skin and 4 arms. Its face was angular, with large black eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light. It wore what appeared to be military armor covered in symbols and decorations. When the alien spoke, its voice was deep and resonating, like thunder rolling across the sky. The translation system worked quickly, converting the alien words into English. "Primitive beings," the alien said, "you have entered the sacred space of the Veltar hegemony. You have violated our most holy war memorial. For this crime, you will surrender immediately or be destroyed." Maria looked at her crew. They all stared back at her, waiting for her response. She had no idea what a Veltar hegemony was, or what war memorial they had supposedly violated. The navigation computer was broken, so they might have been off course. "Hello there," Maria said politely into the communication system. "I'm Captain Maria Santos of the cargo freighter Persistence. We seem to have had some navigation problems. We didn't realize we were in anyone's territory." The alien on the screen seemed surprised by her calm response. It leaned forward, studying her with those large black eyes. "You do not tremble," the alien said, sounding confused. "You do not beg for mercy. Do you not understand your situation? You are surrounded by the war fleet of the mighty Veltar. We have destroyed entire civilizations. We have conquered 17 species. You should be cowering in fear." Rodriguez, who had been listening to the conversation, stepped forward. "Hey, are you folks having engine trouble too? We noticed some unusual energy readings from your ships. If you need any spare parts, we've got a pretty good supply room." Dr. Chen pulled out her tablet and started taking notes. "This is fascinating. A spacefaring civilization with what appears to be a military-based society. The ship design suggests they prioritize intimidation over efficiency." The alien on the screen looked even more confused. "Intimidation over efficiency? What do you mean by that?" "Well," Dr. Chen said, adjusting her glasses, "your ships are very impressive looking, but I can see several design flaws that would make them less fuel efficient. Your reactor signatures suggest you're using a fusion system that's at least 50 years behind current human technology. We could probably help you upgrade." Maria watched as the alien seemed to struggle with this information. Other aliens appeared on the screen behind the first one, all looking equally confused. "You scanned our ships?" the first alien asked. "Sorry about that," Lisa said. "Our sensors automatically scan anything nearby for navigation purposes. It's a safety feature. We weren't trying to spy or anything." James Park looked at the readouts on his screen. "Captain, their shield generators are running pretty hot. They might want to cycle them down before they overheat." The alien leader made a gesture to someone off-screen. After a moment, he looked back at the humans. "You are either very brave or very stupid," he said. "I am War Marshal Zekthera of the Veltar hegemony. In 1,000 years of conquest, no species has ever shown such casual disrespect in the face of our might." "Oh, we're not being disrespectful," Maria said quickly. "We just don't really understand what's going on. We're cargo haulers, not military. We were just passing through on our way to deliver some medical supplies to the colony on Kepler 442b. War Marshal Zekthara stared at them for a long moment. "Medical supplies?" "Yes, they had an outbreak of Martian flu. Nothing too serious, but they needed antibiotics and some diagnostic equipment." The War Marshal looked at his subordinates, then back at the screen. "You carry healing supplies?" "Among other things, yes. That's what cargo haulers do. We carry whatever needs to be moved from one place to another." There was a long silence. Finally, War Marshal Zekthara spoke again. "You will accompany us to our command station. Do not attempt to flee or you will be destroyed." "Sure thing," Maria said. "Just lead the way. But could you maybe not use the tractor beam? Our cargo is kind of delicate, and those beams can cause vibrations that might damage the medical equipment." The War Marshal stared at her again, then made another gesture. The tractor beam that had been locking onto the Persistence shut off. "Follow our lead ship," he said, and the screen went dark. Maria looked around at her crew. They all seemed excited, rather than afraid. "Well," she said, "I guess we're about to make first contact official. Everyone stay calm and be polite. Let's see what these Veltar folks are all about." The Veltar command station was massive. It looked like a dark metal city floating in space with towers and spikes jutting out in all directions. The Persistence looked like a tiny toy next to it as they docked in one of the smaller bays. War Marshal Zekthara waited for them in the docking bay, surrounded by dozens of Veltar soldiers. The soldiers were all tall and gray-skinned like their leader, but they carried weapons that hummed with energy. Their armor was black and covered in sharp angles designed to look as threatening as possible. Captain Maria Santos stepped off her ship, followed by Dr. Sarah Chen and Rodriguez. The other crew members stayed behind to watch the ship, though Lisa Wang kept her communication equipment ready in case they needed help. "Welcome to Command Station Theraxis," War Marshal Zekthara said. His voice echoed in the large docking. "For you are the first beings to enter Veltar space without immediately surrendering in over 300 years. Dr. Chen looked around the docking bay with fascination. "The architecture is remarkable. You've designed everything to create a sense of psychological intimidation. The high ceilings, the dark colors, the angular shapes. It's all meant to make visitors feel small and afraid." The War Marshal seemed taken aback by her observation. "You study our construction methods?" "I study everything," Dr. Chen said, pulling out her tablet to take notes. "I'm a xenobiologist and anthropologist. This is the first alien civilization humans have ever encountered, so everything is fascinating to me." Rodriguez was examining The docking bay equipment. Your loading systems are pretty impressive, but you might want to check the magnetic seal on bay door number 3. It's not quite aligned right. Several Veltar soldiers exchanged confused looks. They had never encountered prisoners who offered maintenance advice. War Marshal Zekthara led them through long corridors lined with weapons and banners from conquered civilizations. The walls displayed the destruction of entire planets and the surrender of various alien species. Everything was designed to show the power and ruthlessness of the Veltar Empire. These are the trophies of our conquests, the War Marshal explained. 17 species have fallen before our might. Their worlds now serve the hegemony, and their peoples work for the glory of Veltar. Maria looked at the displays with sadness rather than fear. That's terrible. All those people who died in wars that probably didn't need to happen. Did not need to happen? Zekthara stopped walking. These conquests brought order to the galaxy. We brought civilization to primitive worlds. But did you try talking to them first? Maria asked. In our experience, most conflicts can be resolved through negotiation. War is usually a last resort when communication breaks down. Dr. Chen was studying one of the displays that showed a planet being destroyed. The energy requirements for this level of destruction must be enormous. Think of what you could have built instead with all those resources. They reached the main command chamber, and Maria gasped despite herself. The room was huge, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. The floor was made of some kind of black stone that reflected their images like dark water. Around the edges of the room stood dozens of Veltar officials, all watching the humans with curious eyes. In the center of the room was a raised platform where War Marshal Zekthara took his position. Energy fields created a circle around the platform, and the air itself seemed to hum with power. This was clearly designed to be the most intimidating room on the station. "This is our chamber of judgment," Zekthara announced. "Here we decide the fate of those who oppose the hegemony." Dr. Chen immediately started taking measurements with her tablet. "The acoustic properties are fascinating. The room amplifies sound in a way that would make any speaker seem more powerful and threatening. You are supposed to be afraid," one of the Veltar officials said, sounding frustrated. "Why?" Rodriguez asked. "You haven't threatened to hurt us. You've been pretty polite so far." War Marshal Zekthara activated some kind of device, and suddenly the room filled with a deep, pulsing energy that was designed to create feelings of fear and helplessness. It was a psychic intimidation field that had broken the will of countless beings over the centuries. Maria felt a slight tingling sensation, but nothing more. Is that supposed to do something? It feels kind of like a massage. Chair. Dr. Chen was taking readings on her tablet. Interesting. It's some kind of directed electromagnetic field that's supposed to affect brain chemistry. But human brains must be structured differently than the species it was designed for. The Veltar officials began murmuring among themselves. Their most powerful intimidation technology had no effect on these strange beings. "Perhaps you do not understand your situation," Zekthara said, his voice growing louder. "You have two choices. Submit to the hegemony and become our servants, or be destroyed." Completely. Maria considered this for a moment. "Well, we appreciate the offer, but we already have jobs. We're independent cargo haulers, and we have a delivery to complete. But thank you for thinking of us." The silence in the room was complete. No species had ever politely declined subjugation before. "You refuse?" Zekthara asked. "It's not personal," Maria said. "It's just that we promised to deliver these medical supplies, and we always keep our promises. But maybe we could work out some kind of trade agreement. Humans are always interested in peaceful commerce with new civilizations." Dr. Chen stepped forward. "Actually, we might be able to help each other. From what I've observed, your empire seems to be having some efficiency problems. High maintenance costs, resource waste, constant military expenses. We've dealt with similar issues in human history." "You would help us?" another Veltar official asked. "Of course," Rodriguez said. "That's what neighbors do. We help each other out." War Marshal Zekthara looked around at his subordinates. For the first time in his long military career, he was completely unsure of what to do. These humans showed no fear, offered no submission, but also showed no hostility. They spoke of helping their enemies as if it was the most natural thing in the world. In 1,000 years, he said slowly, no species has ever offered to help the Veltar Empire improve itself. Really? Maria asked. That's sad. Cooperation usually works better than conquest. You can get so much more done when everyone is working together voluntarily. Dr. Chen was still taking notes. Your social structure seems to be based entirely on dominance hierarchies maintained through fear. But that's actually a very inefficient way to organize a civilization. It wastes enormous amounts of energy and resources. You study us as if we were laboratory specimens, Zekthara observed. Not specimens, Dr. Chen corrected. Fellow intelligent beings with a fascinating but somewhat problematic social system. Every civilization goes through growing pains. Humans went through a similar phase a few centuries ago. The War Marshal sat down heavily in his command chair. What do you mean, a similar phase? We used to solve problems through war too, Maria explained. It took us a while to figure out that cooperation worked better. But once we did, everything improved dramatically. Better technology, better living standards, better everything. You have transcended warfare? Mostly. We still have conflicts, but we usually resolve them through negotiation, trade agreements, or peaceful competition. Actual violence is pretty rare these days. War Marshal Zekthara stared at the three humans standing calmly in his chamber of judgment. Everything he thought he knew about the universe was being challenged by their simple presence. I do not know what to do with you, he admitted. While War Marshal Zekthara struggled with what to do about the humans, the crew of the Persistence had been busy doing what humans always did when they encountered problems. They tried to help fix them. James Park had noticed that the air recycling systems in the docking bay were working much harder than they should. The filters were clogged and the circulation pumps were operating at dangerous stress levels. So he did what any good mechanic would do. He started fixing them. Hey, excuse me, he said to one of the Veltar technicians working nearby. Your atmospheric processors are running at about 60% efficiency. If you don't mind me saying so, you could probably improve that pretty easily. The technician, whose name was Vel Nash, looked suspicious. You are a prisoner. Why do you care about our life support systems? James shrugged. Bad air affects everyone. Plus, inefficient systems waste energy and cost more to maintain. I noticed you've got some spare parts that would work perfectly for an upgrade. Vel Nash had been maintaining the station's systems for over 20 years, and they had indeed been getting less efficient over time. What kind of upgrade? Well, if you replace these filtration units with a cyclical scrubber system and add some buffer tanks to smooth out the pressure variations, you could probably increase efficiency by at least 30%. Within an hour, James was elbow-deep in Veltar machinery, with Vel Nash eagerly learning human engineering techniques. Word spread quickly among the technical staff, and soon James had a small group of Veltar engineers clustered around him, asking questions and taking notes. Meanwhile, Lisa Wang had made contact with the station's communication center. The Veltar communication officer, Thexandra, was struggling with a problem that had been bothering her for months. Our long-range communications have been losing signal strength, Thexandra explained. We have tried everything, but the degradation continues. Lisa looked at their setup and immediately saw the problem. You're using a single-point transmission system. That works fine for short distances, but for galactic range communication, you need signal boosters and relay networks. Relay networks? Sure. You set up communication stations throughout your territory that receive signals and boost them before sending them on. That way you don't lose signal strength over long distances. Lisa spent the next few hours teaching Thexandra about human communication theory. She showed them how to set up redundant networks, how to use compression algorithms to send more data, and how to encrypt communications for security. This is remarkable, Thexandra said. These techniques could revolutionize our communications across the entire hegemony. Dr. Sarah Chen had found her way to the station's database center, where she was having a fascinating conversation with the chief information officer, Kex Thule. You keep records of all your conquests? She asked, scrolling through historical data. Of course. Every victory of the hegemony is recorded for posterity. Dr. Chen studied the records with growing interest. This is fascinating, but I think there might be some gaps in your historical analysis. Gaps? Well, you have detailed records of military victories, but very little information about the actual civilizations you conquered. What were their cultures like? What technologies did they have? What could you have learned from them? Kexthul had never considered this before. We learned that they were weak and we were strong. But what about their science, their art, their philosophy? Every civilization develops unique solutions to universal problems. By not studying them, you missed opportunities to improve your own society. Dr. Chen showed Kexthul some examples from human history. When humans encountered new civilizations, we found that each one had developed different technologies and ideas. By sharing knowledge, everyone benefited. You shared knowledge with your enemies? They weren't our enemies. They were just people we hadn't met yet. Back on the Persistence, the rest of the crew was receiving a steady stream of Veltar visitors. Captain Maria had given them permission to come aboard and see how a human ship operated, and the aliens were amazed by what they found. The ship was small and efficient, designed for long-range cargo hauling rather than intimidation. Everything had a purpose, and there was no wasted space or resources. The crew quarters were comfortable but simple, with personal items and photographs that showed these humans had families and lives outside their work. "Where are your weapons?" asked Sub-Commander Kethvar, who was touring the ship. "We don't carry weapons," Rodriguez explained. "This is a cargo ship, we're not military." "But how do you defend yourself?" "We've never needed to. Most problems can be solved through talking, and we carry emergency beacons in case we need help." "You travel through space completely defenseless?" "Not defenseless. We have shields and armor for protection against asteroids and space debris, but we don't expect to fight anyone." This concept was completely foreign to the Veltar, who had never encountered a spacefaring civilization that didn't arm their vessels for war. The medical bay particularly fascinated them. Dr. Martinez, the ship's medic, showed them equipment designed to treat injuries and illnesses from dozens of different human colonies. "You carry healing technology for many different environments?" asked the Veltar medical officer who was visiting. "Of course. Humans have spread to a lot of different worlds, and each environment creates different health challenges. We try to be prepared for anything. And you would use this equipment to heal anyone who needed it?" "That's what medical equipment is for," Dr. Martinez said, as if the answer was obvious. Word of these interactions began to spread throughout the station. The Veltar had never encountered beings like these humans. They showed no fear, offered help freely, and seemed genuinely puzzled by the concept of conquest-based civilization. In the station's mess hall, Cook had been trading recipes with the Veltar food preparation staff. The aliens were amazed to discover that humans had developed thousands of different ways to prepare food, not just for nutrition, but for pleasure. "You eat for enjoyment?" asked the head cook, whose name was Bexthal. "Of course. Food is one of life's great pleasures. Different cultures have developed amazing cuisines. Here, try this." Cook had prepared a simple meal using ingredients from the ship's stores, seasoned with herbs and spices that created flavors the Veltar had never experienced. Bexthal took a careful bite, and his eyes widened. This is wonderful. The flavors are so complex, so satisfying. Food brings people together," Cook explained. "Sharing a meal is one of the best ways to make friends." All of these interactions were being reported back to War Marshal Zekthara, who found himself dealing with a crisis he had never imagined. His entire worldview was based on the idea that the universe was divided into the strong and the weak, the conquerors and the conquered. But these humans didn't fit into either category. They were clearly not weak. Their technology was more advanced than Veltar systems in many ways. But they were not conquerors either. They seemed to approach every problem with the assumption that cooperation was better than conflict. Even more disturbing, his own people were beginning to question things they had never questioned before. Engineers were excited about new efficiency improvements, Communication officers were eager to implement better systems. Even the kitchen staff was talking about making food that people would actually enjoy eating. "Sir," his aide reported, "the humans have fixed our atmospheric processors, upgraded our communications array, and shown our medical staff new treatment techniques. Our efficiency ratings have improved by 23% in just one day." War Marshal Zekthara sat in his command chair, staring out at the small human cargo ship docked in his station. In one day, these 12 humans had accomplished more positive change than his empire had seen in decades. What kind of beings are these humans? He wondered aloud. His aide, who had been talking to the human communications officer, said quietly, "I think, sir, they are what we could have been." News of the humans traveled fast through the Veltar hegemony. Within days, reports reached every corner of their empire about the strange beings who showed no fear and offered help instead of submission. The reaction was immediate and unprecedented. The mining world of Kethmanur, the enslaved Zephyrian workers, heard about humans who spoke of voluntary cooperation instead of forced labor. For the first time in 50 years of oppression, they began to whisper among themselves about resistance. "Is it true?" asked Yexdal, an elderly Zephyrian who had been a leader before the conquest. "Are there really beings who refuse to bow to the Veltar?" The news had come through hidden communication channels that the Veltar didn't monitor. Underground networks that had been dormant for decades suddenly came alive with activity. "Not only do they refuse to bow," replied Miradan, a younger Zephyrian who worked in the communication center, "but they are teaching the Veltar how to improve their own systems. They treat the conquerors as equals." This concept was revolutionary. If these humans could stand as equals with the Veltar, perhaps other species could do the same. On the agricultural world of Threxnala, the conquered Mantari people began organizing their first protests in 30 years. They had heard that the humans spoke of trade agreements and voluntary cooperation. If such things were possible, why should they continue to work as slaves? The Veltar garrison commander on Threxnala, Sub-Marshal Vekthor, found himself facing peaceful demonstrations for the first time in his career. The Mantari weren't attacking or trying to escape. They were simply refusing to work until they could negotiate better conditions. "What do we do?" his lieutenant asked. "Our standard procedures don't cover peaceful resistance." Sub-Marshal Vekthor had been trained to crush armed rebellions, not handle labor negotiations. The situation was completely outside his experience. Baku. On Command Station Theraxis, War Marshal Zekathara was receiving reports of unrest throughout the Empire. But it wasn't the violent uprisings that Veltar forces were trained to handle. Instead, it was something much more dangerous to their system of control. People were simply asking questions. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported, 17 different worlds are experiencing what they're calling peaceful resistance. The subject populations are refusing to work, but they're not fighting us. They're asking for negotiations." Negotiations? They want to discuss working conditions, compensation, and what they're calling voluntary cooperation agreements, the same terms the humans mentioned. Zekthara realized that the humans had done something no military force had ever accomplished. They had given hope to the conquered peoples of the Empire. Not hope for revenge or violent freedom, but hope for a better way of living together. "How do we negotiate with slaves?" he asked his staff. None of them knew. The Veltar had never considered their subjects as anything other than resources to be used. Meanwhile, the humans continued their helpful behavior, completely unaware of the galactic revolution they had started. Dr. Chen had been working with Kexthul to reorganize the station's database systems. "Your current filing system is based entirely on military hierarchy," she observed. "But that makes it very difficult to find information about non-military topics." "What other topics could there be?" Kexthul asked. Dr. Chen looked at him with surprise. "Science, art, philosophy, medicine, engineering, literature, music. All the things that make civilization worthwhile." She showed him examples of human databases that contained millions of files on thousands of different subjects. "Knowledge is meant to be shared. The more information you have access to, the better decisions you can make. Kex-Thul began to understand that the Veltar had been missing most of what made other civilizations interesting and valuable. They had conquered bodies and worlds, but they had never conquered ideas. James Park had finished upgrading the station's main systems and was now working with Veltar engineers on long-term maintenance protocols. The key is preventive maintenance, he explained to a group of fascinated technicians. Instead of waiting for things to break, you check them regularly and replace parts before they fail. But that seems inefficient, said one engineer. Why replace something that still works? Because replacing a small part is cheaper and easier than rebuilding an entire system after it breaks down catastrophically. This simple concept began to revolutionize Veltar thinking about resource management. They had always focused on short-term power rather than long-term sustainability. The crisis came to a head when War Marshal Zekthara received a direct challenge to single combat from the most unlikely source, his own self-doubt. I must test these humans, he announced to his staff. I will challenge their leader to personal combat. If they are truly fearless, she will accept. His subordinates were confused. Sir, what will that prove? Everything, Zekthara said. Either she will fight with the desperate fury of a cornered animal, or she will show her true cowardice. Either way, I will understand what manner of beings we face. Captain Maria Santos was surprised when the formal challenge was delivered to her. He wants to fight me? She asked Dr. Chen. It appears to be some kind of cultural custom, Dr. Chen replied. From what I can tell, personal combat is how Veltar leaders establish dominance. Rodriguez looked worried. Captain, this guy is twice your size and probably has military training. Maria considered this. Well, if it's important to their culture, I suppose I should be polite about it, but I'm not really interested in hurting anyone. Maybe you could suggest making it a friendly sparring match, Lisa Wang suggested, like a sporting event rather than actual combat. When Maria made this suggestion to War Marshal Zekthara, he was completely taken aback. Friendly sparring? Sure. We could use practice weapons and safety equipment. That way nobody gets seriously hurt, but you still get to see how I handle myself in a fight. This was not at all what Zekthara had expected. In Veltar culture, personal combat was supposed to be about domination, fear, and the willingness to kill or be killed. The concept of friendly competition was completely foreign to him, but he agreed to the modified terms, curious to see what would happen. The combat took place in the station's main arena, with most of the crew and staff watching. Maria wore borrowed Veltar armor and carried a practice weapon that would deliver painful but non-lethal energy blasts. War Marshal Zekthara approached the fight as he always had, with the intention of using fear and intimidation to break his opponent's will before the physical combat even began. But Maria approached it like a training exercise. She was focused, competent, and completely relaxed. When the fight began, she didn't attack aggressively or try to intimidate her opponent. Instead, she simply defended herself skillfully and waited for openings. Why do you not attack? Zekthara demanded during a pause in the combat. I'm not angry at you, Maria replied. This is just practice, right? The War Marshal found himself completely off balance. He had spent his entire life using anger and fear as weapons, but Maria's calm competence neutralized both. She fought not because she hated him, but simply because the situation required it. When she finally won the match, not through superior aggression, but through better technique and patience, Zekthara lay on the ground, looking up at her, with complete confusion. I do not understand, he said. You have defeated me, but you show no triumph. You have proven your superiority, but you do not gloat. Maria offered him her hand to help him up. It was just a sparring match. You're a good fighter. You just need to work on your defensive timing. As War Marshal Zekthara accepted her help and stood up, something fundamental changed in his worldview. He realized that true strength didn't come from the ability to dominate others through fear. It came from the confidence that made domination unnecessary. What are you people? He asked quietly. Maria smiled. We're just humans. We try to get along with everyone and help out when we can, standing in that arena, surrounded by his subordinates. And the human crew, War Marshal Zekthara, finally understood that everything he had believed about power and conquest was wrong. 6 months after the Persistence had accidentally entered Veltar space, the galaxy was a very different place. The Veltar hegemony no longer existed. In its place was something unprecedented in galactic history: the Veltar Cooperative, a voluntary alliance of 18 species working together for mutual benefit. Captain Maria Santos stood in what used to be the Chamber of Judgment, now converted into a conference room where representatives from different worlds met to discuss trade agreements and joint projects. The dark, intimidating decorations had been replaced with comfortable seating and communication equipment donated by various member species. "I still can't believe how quickly everything changed," she said to Administrator Zekthara, formerly War Marshal Zekthara. Zekthara had traded his military armor for simple administrative robes. The title of War Marshal had been abolished along with most of the military hierarchy that had once ruled the empire. "Change was inevitable once we understood the alternative," he replied. "Your people showed us that cooperation produces better results than conquest with much less cost in resources and lives." The transformation had not been easy. When Zekthara first announced that the hegemony would be dissolved and replaced with voluntary agreements, there had been resistance from hardline military commanders who couldn't imagine any other way of organizing society. But the results spoke for themselves. Worlds that had been rebellious under military occupation became productive partners once they were given fair representation and compensation for their contributions. The Zephyrian mining operations increased their output by 40% once. The workers became partners rather than slaves. The Mantari agricultural worlds began producing food surpluses that could be traded to worlds that needed them. The economic improvements alone justify the change, reported Kex Thule, who had become the cooperative's chief information coordinator. "We're producing 23% more goods with 18% less resource expenditure." Dr. Sarah Chen had been appointed as the first human cultural liaison, helping different species understand each other's social systems and find ways to work together effectively. The most interesting part is how quickly the cultural barriers broke down once people started working together instead of being forced to submit, she observed. "We're seeing art, music, and literature being shared between species that had never communicated before." The humans had finally completed their original cargo delivery, though they were 3 months late. The medical supplies had reached Kepler 442b, eventually, and the colonists there were understanding about the delay once they heard about the first contact situation. But the crew of the Persistence found that they couldn't just return to normal cargo runs. They had accidentally become the most famous humans in the galaxy, and everyone wanted to meet the people who had transformed a 1,000-year-old empire simply by being themselves. "We've got requests for diplomatic visits from 47 different civilizations," Lisa Wang reported. Apparently, word has spread beyond the former hegemony territory. James Park had been particularly busy. His engineering improvements to Veltar systems had become the template for upgrading infrastructure throughout the cooperative. He now had a team of engineers from 6 different species working on standardization projects. "The interesting thing is how each species has developed different solutions to the same basic problems," he explained to a mixed group of engineers. "When you combine the best ideas from everyone, you get systems that are better than anything any single species could have developed alone." Rodriguez had become something of a celebrity among the technical staff. His practical approach to maintenance and repair had revolutionized how the former hegemony managed their equipment. "The Veltar used to replace entire systems when they had problems," he said. "Now they fix things properly and everything lasts longer and works better." Cook had perhaps had the most fun with the cultural exchange. He had been working with food specialists from different worlds to develop fusion cuisines that combined the best elements from multiple species. "Food is the universal language," he declared, serving up a dish that combined Veltar protein synthesis with Mantari spice cultivation and human preparation techniques. "Everyone understands delicious." The most significant change was in how conflicts were handled throughout the former empire. Instead of military suppression, problems were now resolved through negotiation and mediation. We had a territorial dispute between two mining colonies last month, Administrator Zekthara reported. In the old days, I would have sent warships to enforce a decision. Instead, we brought representatives from both colonies together, reviewed the geological surveys, and worked out a resource-sharing agreement that satisfied everyone. Dr. Martinez had been working with medical personnel from different species to establish healthcare standards throughout the cooperative. The most remarkable thing is how much medical knowledge was lost under the old system. Each conquered species had unique treatments and techniques, but they were never shared because everything was compartmentalized by military hierarchy. Now, a Zephyrian treatment for radiation exposure was being used to help Veltar workers, while Mentari agricultural techniques were providing better nutrition on worlds that had struggled with food production. The biggest challenge had been establishing the new governmental structure. The cooperative was governed by a council with representatives from each member world, but creating fair representation for species of vastly different sizes and needs had required considerable negotiation. The humans suggested something called proportional representation, Zekthara explained to a gathering of planetary governors. Each world gets a voice proportional to their population and contribution, but no single world can dominate the others. Captain Santos found herself giving presentations to groups of new species that wanted to join the cooperative. The basic principles were always the same: voluntary cooperation, mutual respect, and shared benefit. The key thing to remember, she would tell each new group, is that everyone brings something valuable to the table. No species is superior or inferior to any other. You're just different, and those differences make you stronger when you work together. The presentation she was giving today was to the newly formed Galactic Council, an organization that included not just the cooperative, but representatives from dozens of other civilizations that had heard about the peaceful transformation of the Veltar Empire. 6 months ago, Maria began, none of us could have imagined that the most feared military empire in this sector of the galaxy would voluntarily dissolve itself and become a cooperative alliance. But it happened, and the results have exceeded everyone's expectations. She activated a holographic display showing economic and social statistics from the former hegemony territory. Production is up across all sectors. Quality of life has improved dramatically. Scientific research has accelerated as information sharing replaced military secrecy. Even population growth has increased as people feel more optimistic about the future. Administrator Zekthara, representing the Veltar Cooperative, stood up to address the council. I spent most of my life believing that strength came from the ability to dominate others through fear, he said. The humans showed me that true strength comes from the confidence that makes domination unnecessary. They taught us that cooperation is not a sign of weakness. It is the foundation of genuine power. A representative from the Andromedan Trade Federation asked the question that everyone was thinking. How do we know this model can work for other civilizations? The Veltar transformation was unique. Maria smiled. Every civilization is unique, but the basic principles are universal. People want to feel safe, valued, and free to contribute to something larger than themselves. When you create systems that provide those things, most conflicts resolve themselves. Dr. Chen added, We've documented first contact with 17 different species over the past 2 centuries. In every case, the key to successful relations was approaching them with curiosity rather than fear, and offering mutual benefit rather than demanding submission. The council session ended with a unanimous vote to establish the Galactic Cooperation Protocol, a set of guidelines based on human first contact procedures and the Veltar transformation experience. As the delegates filed out, Administrator Zekthara approached Captain Santos. I have been wondering, he said. When your ship first entered our territory, did you know what would happen? Did you plan this transformation? Maria laughed. Are you kidding? We were just trying to figure out where we were and deliver our cargo. We had no idea we were going to meet aliens, let alone help reorganize a galactic empire. So, this was all accidental? Completely accidental. We just treated you the way we treat everyone, as people worth getting to know. Zekthara shook his head in amazement. Your species has conquered an empire not through superior weapons or cunning strategy, but through the simple act of being yourselves. Maria looked out at the busy station where Veltar, humans, Zephyrians, Mentari, and a dozen other species were working together on various projects.